Hello fellow woodworkers and welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop. This week we're going to be making a track for my circular saw. Roll the intro. So, like many of you fellow woodworkers, I am sure in your shops you have a saw or a range of saws. As you know from my videos, I've got a plunge saw, which is the Parkside, which I'm very happy with, and I use that for most of the work that's in the workshop. But if it's coming to cutting up bigger or different pieces of woods that don't need perhaps so many fine cuts, then I use this. The skill saw. Now this is just a plain bog standard circular saw. It was just an entry-level one. I bought it from B&Q. It was about £40 at the time, I think. It was prior to COVID, and this saw is a very powerful saw. It's 1250 watts. It's more powerful than my other saws, and it has a greater depth on the blade. But one of the disadvantages of this saw is it is quite powerful, but it's quite cumbersome, and it's not very easy to do a precision cut in terms of a longer piece of wood. So for example, when I cut down bigger sheets of MDF or of hardwood or plywood, then I tend to use this one first, and then I trim up the edge or sort the edge out. But the one thing that this hasn't got, which obviously other saws do have, is it doesn't have a track that goes with it. So what I've got to do today, in my mind, I've got a plan of how I'd like to create a track for my circular saw to give me more accurate cuts. Now, I'm going to do it just using the wood that I've got lying around in the workshop. As you've seen previously, I picked up a couple of bits of really nice MDF, bargain MDF, which I got on my last trip out, and I've also got a couple of bits of wood that I've recycled from a caravan and from the kitchen refurb that a friend recently donated me a whole kitchen. So I've got some wood that I think I can use to recycle it, and I've got a really clear idea in mind on how I'd like to make this guide for my circular saw. So let's do it now.
So the first stage was to get a really accurate measurement of the circular saw, so I knew exactly how wide to make the track, and also to make sure that I knew the clearance between the track and the bottom of the machine.
Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is get an accurate measurement of the width of the saw. I've actually looked online and found the manual for this saw, and it says it's 16 centimeters wide, which is exactly what it is, but it does say it's 30 centimeters or 300 mil long, and actually my unit isn't. From start to stop, from the very back to the very front, it's actually 310. It's a centimeter bigger than it says in the instructions. So I'm going to make sure that I do all of the measurements from what I've actually got rather than that. So I'm going to create a track, and I'm going to leave a gap either side of, I think I'm going to go for about 2 or 3 centimeters wide, and I'm going to use MDF for the guides either side, and obviously the stops at the beginning and the end. One thing I am going to do, I think, is take the blade off to make it easier to measure this and actually put it on the track. But the next thing to do is to select some wood that I can use for the project. So let's have a look in the wood pile and see what we've got.
I realise how lucky I am at the moment to have this wood pile, considering the cost of wood, and there's quite a lot of different pieces of wood in it. So the first thing you just saw there was a piece of MDF, which I bought recently for a reduced price, 75p I think it was. After that, I just wanted to pop out the blade, because I knew I'd be doing a lot of measuring and a lot of running the track up and down, and obviously the blade just gets in the way. So it's very easy, just a lock bolt and pop off one of the bolts to get it out. The next thing to do is just to take this handle off. As you can see, this was actually from a caravan, from a sofa in a caravan, and I wanted to get a sort of flat side on one side, so I just ran the marker up on the side, and then using the Parkside plunge saw, I just cut it off to A, give me a straight side, and B, also make it nice and even. Then I measured the width of the track straight down. I left 4 centimeters either side of the original size of the track to allow for the edging strip, which I make in a minute, but I allowed that for a very specific reason, which you'll see. I wanted to make sure that I got enough of a sort of guide either side Just checked it measured perfectly, which strangely enough it did. Then the next stage was to put the piece of leftover material through the table saw, which I did, and I went for 2 strips of this thinner material. I'm using MDF on one side and this sort of funny plywood stuff on the other, but I wanted 2 strips just in case there was anything wrong or I was unhappy with something. So I ran the spare piece through twice and got 2 identical size strips. I also left the table saw set up like this because I later then ran the MDF through and got another strip that was the same width of MDF. So they were exactly the same size. So I then went on and offered it up, and I was pleased with how straight it was and how closely it matched on the ends and the sides, because obviously it's an old piece of wood, and although it looks straight, you just never know, do you? So I got it, and then I butted up the circular saw against it, and at this point I was just checking there was enough clearance, you can see there, under the sort of motor, and I just put in a couple of little bits of cardboard either side just to give me a mil or so to play with. Then it was a case of cutting up the MDF, which is going to be the other side. It's 12mm MDF, which is going to be on the other side where I haven't got the engine of the circular saw. So I offered that up, put the paper back, the card back either side, just to make sure it was all a nice fit, and it was. And then I marked the inside of both pieces of MDF and plywood. I then marked out the holes because although I was gluing it, I also wanted to screw it, A, for added strength, and B, just to give me that little extra bit of insurance. So I pre-drilled all the holes, and I countersunk them, and then it was a case of getting the glue out. This glue I'm using, Tight Bond, is absolutely fantastic. I bought it off of Amazon, and it's a brilliant product, really good. I can see why everyone goes on about it all the time. It's absolutely fantastic. It sets quickly, but it's really strong and really, really good value for money as well. So when I'd glued it, I then just temporarily clamped it, wiped away the glue the spill out, and then I put the screws in and I'd fitted the rail exactly so it was on one side, including dropping it on the floor there. So when I had one side, now whatever happened, I still had that one side of purchase so that I knew that it was completely straight all the way along. So when I'd done that one side and I'd got all the screws in, I could just run the saw up the middle and just make sure there's a little bit more wipe out there. I then moved on to the second one, the second strip, the MDF strip, and basically repeated exactly the same process. Glued it with my signature glue spreader with my finger, spread it all out, and then I actually put the strip on lined up with the saw just to make sure I didn't have any issues. So put the saw on first, checked it was right up against it, and then I put the MDF strip on, and when I sure it was exactly right, I just fixed one screw there, and then all the way along with a little piece of paper I just made sure it was an even distance, which thankfully it was. The next stage, which you can see me doing there, is I put a line mark exactly where I thought the blade would run. This was never going to be perfect, but it just gave me an indicator, and then using a Forstner bit, I just drilled some 20mm holes in all the way along. I didn't explain this very carefully at the beginning, but basically this is going to allow me to see pencil lines when I'm using the track. So if I'm resting it against something where I want to follow a line, I'll be able to see it through these holes. So when I drilled them, I just did my best to sand them off. There was a lot more tear out than I expected, to be honest with you. I was a bit disappointed with that, but I got it all out, got the holes nice and flush and nice and clean. The next stage was to cut that spare strip that I'd cut, that you saw me cut earlier, just to put the end in. I deliberately left the other end open. I'll explain in a minute why. But I cut this little bit off just to give the track an end so that the saw had somewhere to stop. It was a little bit too big, but I just hand sanded it down, drilled it and screwed it in exactly as I'd done with the other pieces, and it was fine. The next thing was to put the blade back in and then cut the groove in the track for the actual blade. This was a bit more difficult than I thought, and ended up with a little bit of a wider cut out at the beginning, which was a bit unfortunate, but I did run it up and down twice just to make sure I got an exact guide. I just propped it up off the table there to stop damaging my table.
Okay, so here is the finished product, and I have to say I'm really pleased with it. There's a couple of things which I'll pick out in a minute, which had I done it again I would improve. I've obviously left this gap at the bottom here where I haven't gone all the way into the wood. I have done that on purpose because at some point I'm going to come up with some sort of mechanism, either a folded mechanism where I can put something on the bottom to keep it straight so I can butt it up against other material, because obviously at the moment it will just need to be clamped. But it is in exactly the right sort of form that I would imagine it being in. So really pleased with how it turned out. I sort of got this idea from watching some different YouTubers, and I've sort of recreated a couple of the ideas into this, but I'm really pleased with how it works out. It's exactly as I imagined it. Now, having said that, of course there are going to be things that I would like to change or I would do differently. You can probably see, if I hold it this way, that it's a little bit flimsy, the wood in the middle. It's 9mm sort of hard board. It looks a bit like plywood, but it's got a slightly different consistency, so it is a little bit in the middle thin, but that is a difficult decision because when I made this I had to balance off how much depth I could get with the blade by how thick this material was. If I had this material as 12 or 18 mil MDF, then it would take 12 or 18 mils away from the possible cut depth of my saw. Now I've got a very cheap entry level saw. If you've got a much more expensive saw, then you can probably get a much different blade depth, but for my one it's not going to go that deep, and I actually want mine to be able to cut probably 40 or 50 mil at least, probably 80 or 90 mil to be fair. And the amount of board that's in between it, I think it would struggle to do that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I did try my best not to get any cut out on the back. I have got quite a bit, as you can see. I have sanded it flat, so I'm not too worried about it, because it's not like it's going to move up and down tons. There's a little bit there I haven't quite got. It's not going to move up and down, and to be honest, it's not going to get a huge amount of use. It's not something I'm going to use every week, but the times that I want to come and use my circular saw and I want to get a nice straight cut, then I've got what I need. The only other thing is this bit at the top, and I'll give you a close-up in the corner there. When I first put the blade in, because obviously to get that first cut you had to rotate the blade then put it in, and as I did it slightly slipped off the edge, so I've got a slightly wider cut there, but again I'm not too worried because that's right at the beginning where the blade first sits in. And obviously these holes, which I didn't explain, these holes that I've made in the middle of the track or the edge of the track are to enable me to see pencil lines when I'm doing cuts. So if I've got a pencil line and that's what I'm cutting to, then I can see exactly where the blade's running, and I've got those sort of access holes to do it. So overall, I'm pleased with how it's turned out. It's turned out exactly as I thought it would, and I think it's going to prove to be very, very useful in the future. If this is your first time at the Garage Workshop, thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe and don't forget to like and comment. If you're a regular viewer, thank you so much for all of the comments. I do read them all. A lot of time and effort goes into producing and planning these videos. I know it doesn't look like it from what you see, but a lot of time and effort goes into planning them. So I'm really appreciative of all your support. Hope you have a fantastic week, and I'll catch you on the next video. Happy woodworking!